Hey again. Okay, in this part I'm going to be setting up my grid, and the grid will be the foundation upon which most of my key elements will be displayed. For instance, the blocks that I'll be using to make up the grid, but that'll become more apparent as we go along. But first things first, I want to change the size of my frame. I need a little more room to work in. I can always change this later on. So we'll make it 960 by 640 for now. Okay, the grid I'm going to be creating, I'm going to be doing it with fast loops, nested loops, and I'm not going to explain too much about that, but if you want to know what that is all about, I suggest you check out a tutorial written by Popcorn called The Clicker's Guide to Fast Loops. And there I think near the bottom of the tutorial, he sets up a grid pretty much the way I'm going to show you how I'm doing it. The only difference is I'm going to be using global values to control my grid. So I create 4 new global values. The first one, I'm going to name it grid X. And the second one will be grid Y. These two will determine how big my grid is. So whether it be 10 blocks by 10 blocks, and then we'll make another global value. We'll call it grid X start position. And the same thing for here, but for the Y. So grid Y start position. Good. And for now we'll just put 10 by 10, and we'll make the starting position, so the position where my first grid block will be laid. We'll start it at X 100 and Y 100, just to keep it simple. Well, we're going to need an object to create the grid. So create a new object. We'll name it grid block. Okay, a couple things. Uncheck create at start, and let's change its appearance. I'll do something simple here. Looks good. And for all my grids, I want the hotspot to be directly in the center, 16 by 16. Good. Run the frame, nothing happens. Actually, you know what? Let's change this so that when we create our grid, it's not over top of our debug system. Okay, close this up, insert a new group of events, and we'll call it something simple like the grid. Keep it active at frame start. We'll put it up just above the debug. Alright, we're going to start our first say on group activation. Start loop, call it grid X, and we will run that loop, retrieve our global value, grid X amount of times. So it'll run 10 times. Okay, now make a nested loop here. On grid X, we will start a new loop, call it grid Y. Oops, did that wrong. On loop, grid X. We'll start a loop grid Y, and we will run that grid Y amount of times. So we'll run it 10 times. Now on loop grid Y, we will create our grid block. And we'll just position it outside the frame for now. There. You can position it anywhere, it doesn't matter, because we're going to actually set its position in the events here. Now, so we create the block, and we want to set its X position to retrieve a global value, the start position, plus we need to get the grid X loop index, grid X, oops, times the width of the grid block. Yeah, in order to get the width of any object, you do this. So we want the width of the object. Take the right edge minus its left edge and close it up. Perfect. We'll do the same thing, but we will do it for the Y position. Set its Y position to the Y start position that we set up. What am I doing? Plus, get the Y index. So grid Y times its height. Nope, to get its height, we do bottom edge minus its top edge. Close it up. Good. Okay. It all looks right. Let's try it out. Oh, and there's our grid. As you can see, it created the grid, 10 columns by 10 rows. And it's the first block that was created was at 200 X and 200 Y. Now, the reason I did it that way is because, my little sticky note here, for my grid, I want it to be resizable. You know, in case I have different levels and stuff like that. And I can easily do that by changing these numbers. It should detect the size of my grid objects and adjust accordingly. It does that by, this part right here. So no matter how big I make the grid object, it'll automatically detect it because I put in the size, the width, and the height that it should be. Does that make sense? Good. Okay, the last part. I want the option, these three places here, these three last options, I'll do in another video. Otherwise this video will get too long. Okay, run it. Looks good. And I'm going to create a new folder. We'll call it main objects. Put my grid block in there. Do the same thing here. Rename the folder. Call it the same thing. Main objects. There. Keep everything nice, neat, and tidy. One more time. Yep. Okay, all I gotta do is change this number, and I can have any size I want, any amount of blocks I want. I can change its starting position. There, you get it? Cool. Okay, that's it for this one. And I'll be back to talk about these three.